The shields are down. Grievous's flagship descends through Coruscant's atmosphere. Battle droids flood the Senate district. Clone troopers are retreating. The Republic capital is falling in real time. Every holonet feed across the galaxy shows the same nightmare. Separatist banners rising over the Senate building. Palpatine watches from his office window. His entire plan is collapsing. The Separatists weren't supposed to win this battle. They were supposed to lose. Palpatine controls both sides. He orchestrates every move, every strategy, every outcome. But war is chaos. Grievous made an unexpected tactical decision. The droid fleet was larger than intelligence predicted. And now the impossible is happening. The side that exists to lose is conquering the galactic capital. Everything Sidious built just shattered. He can't become emperor if droids occupy his office. He can't execute Order 66 from a detention cell. He can't turn Anakin without the dramatic Coruscant rescue. His 1,000-year Sith plan to rule the galaxy just hit a wall made of battle droids and one general who refused to follow the script. What if the Separatists actually took Coruscant? Not as Palpatine's staged kidnapping, but as a real conquest. What if Count Dooku suddenly realized his master lost control, and he could seize power for himself? What if the Jedi Council had to choose between saving Palpatine or letting their enemy keep him? What if Anakin's path to darkness got cut off before it started because there's no rescue, no killing Dooku, no bonding moment that makes him worship the Chancellor? The Clone Wars transform completely. The puppet who was supposed to lose is holding the strings. The master who controlled everything controls nothing. And one battle that went wrong rewrites galactic history. This is the moment Palpatine's brilliant plan meets pure chaos. This is what happens when the galaxy stops following his script. Let's rewind to the Battle of Coruscant as it actually happened, then break it. In Revenge of the Sith, we see the massive space battle, Anakin and Obi-Wan's desperate rescue mission, the destruction of the Invisible Hand, and the ultimate Republic victory that lets Palpatine return to the Senate and continue his plan. It's dramatic, it's intense, and it's carefully choreographed to produce exactly the outcome Palpatine needs. But battles are unpredictable. What if just a few things went differently? What if the Separatist fleet was slightly larger, the Republic defense slightly weaker, the tactical decisions slightly different? The Battle of Coruscant was close enough that small changes could flip the outcome. So let's explore how it could have gone wrong for Palpatine and the Republic. First, the initial assault. In canon, the Separatist fleet emerges from hyperspace and immediately engages the Republic defense fleet. It's a brutal battle, but the Republic holds long enough for reinforcements to arrive and for Anakin and Obi-Wan to rescue Palpatine. But what if the Separatist fleet was bigger? What if Grievous held back forces from other theaters and committed everything to this one decisive strike? Imagine Grievous with twice as many ships. The Republic defense fleet would be overwhelmed in minutes instead of hours. Coruscant's orbital defenses would fall before reinforcements could arrive. The planetary shields, designed to protect against bombardment, would be breached by concentrated fire from hundreds of capital ships. And suddenly, Grievous has orbital superiority over the Republic capital with nothing to stop him from landing armies. The ground invasion would be swift and devastating. Separatist landing craft would descend on the Senate district, the Jedi Temple, key government buildings, and strategic infrastructure. Battle droids would flood the streets. Clone troopers would fight desperately, but they'd be outnumbered and cut off from support. The capital would fall in days, maybe hours if Grievous is aggressive enough. Palpatine's office would be one of the primary targets. Grievous knows the Chancellor is the key to Republic morale and government function. Capturing or killing him would be the ultimate victory. In canon, this was staged as a kidnapping, a planned event where Palpatine allowed himself to be taken to create the conditions for Anakin's fall. But in this timeline, it's real. Grievous isn't following Sidious's orders. He's genuinely conquering the capital and taking the Chancellor as a legitimate prisoner of war. The moment Grievous's droids smash through the Chancellor's office doors, Palpatine faces a crisis unlike anything in his carefully laid plans. He could reveal himself as Darth Sidious, could unleash his Sith powers and slaughter every droid in the building. But doing so would expose him. The Jedi would know. The Republic would know. His entire political persona would shatter. He'd gain nothing and lose everything, so Palpatine has to play the role. Has to be the frightened Chancellor, the victim of Separatist aggression, the helpless politician rescued by Jedi heroes, except there are no Jedi heroes coming because the battle is already lost. He's put in binders. He's marched through his own office building by battle droids. He's loaded onto a Separatist transport, and for perhaps the first time in decades, Darth Sidious doesn't control the situation. Count Dooku would be present for this. As the political head of the Separatist movement, he'd want to personally witness the capture of the Republic's leader. And this is where things get extremely interesting, because Dooku knows who Palpatine really is. He knows his master orchestrated this entire war. He knows the Separatists are supposed to lose, and now, suddenly, they're winning in a way that completely contradicts the plan. Dooku would have to make a choice in that moment. Does he quietly facilitate Palpatine's eventual escape, maintaining the charade and trusting his master has a plan? Or does he realize this is an opportunity, a chance to break free from Sidious's control and genuinely lead the Separatist cause to victory? The temptation would be enormous. Dooku has spent years watching Palpatine manipulate him, knowing he's just a tool to be discarded eventually. This could be his chance to become the master instead of the apprentice. But Dooku is also a Sith, and Sith are defined by their ambition and treachery. If he thinks Palpatine is vulnerable, if he believes the plan has failed and his master is now a liability, he might make a move. Not openly, not yet, but the seeds would be planted. He'd start thinking about what happens next, about whether he needs Sidious anymore, about whether he could take Grievous and the Separatist military and actually win this war. Meanwhile, the Jedi Council would be receiving devastating reports. Coruscant is falling. The Senate is being evacuated or captured. The Chancellor is in Separatist hands, and they're scattered across the galaxy, leading clone armies in battles that suddenly seem pointless if the capital is lost. What do? Yoda would feel the disturbance in the Force immediately. The fall of Coruscant isn't just a military defeat. It's a wound in the fabric of galactic society. The planet has been the center of civilization for millennia. Its fall would send shockwaves through the Force that every Jedi would sense. Yoda would know this is a turning point, a moment where the war could be lost completely if they don't respond correctly. Mace Windu would want to mount a rescue mission immediately. Gather every available Jedi, recall the fleets, retake Coruscant by force. It's the bold, aggressive approach that fits his combat-focused philosophy. But it's also potentially suicidal. The Separatists would be dug in, prepared for exactly this response. They'd have orbital defenses, ground fortifications, and the advantage of fighting on a planet they control. A frontal assault could cost the Republic most of its remaining Jedi and military strength. Obi-Wan would advocate for a more measured approach. Perhaps a covert operation to rescue the Chancellor and key senators, followed by a siege to starve out the Separatist occupation. He'd argue that throwing everything at Coruscant in a desperate assault is exactly what the Separatists would expect and prepare for. Better to be strategic, to hit them where they're weak, to force them to spread their forces thin defending their conquest. Anakin would be torn. His first instinct would be to save Palpatine. The Chancellor is his friend, his mentor, the father figure who's guided him through the war. The idea of leaving Palpatine in Separatist hands would be unbearable, but Anakin is also a general, a military leader who understands tactics. He'd see the logic in Obi-Wan's caution, even as his emotions scream at him to act immediately. This creates the first major divergence from canon. In the original timeline, Anakin rescues Palpatine over Coruscant, kills Dooku at Palpatine's urging, and deepens his attachment to the Chancellor through the shared trauma of the battle. But in this timeline, there's no rescue. Palpatine is genuinely captured. Anakin doesn't kill Dooku. The relationship between them doesn't intensify in the same way. This changes the trajectory of Anakin's fall dramatically. Padme's pregnancy would still be a factor. She'd still be in Coruscant when it falls, or she'd evacuate just before. If she's captured with other senators, Anakin's desperation would be even more intense. He'd be fighting to save both Palpatine and his secret wife. If she escapes, she'd be urging the Senate in exile to negotiate rather than fight, to find a peaceful solution before more lives are lost. Either way, her influence on Anakin would be pulling him toward light and restraint, rather than darkness and aggression. The Republic government would have to relocate. In the old Republic, before Coruscant became the capital, different worlds served as the governmental center. Corellia, Alderaan, Chandrila, any number of core worlds could host the emergency Senate. Bail Organa would likely offer Alderaan, positioning his world as the temporary capital and gaining enormous political influence in the process. But relocating the government is more than just moving senators to a new planet. It's a massive logistical and symbolic challenge. All the bureaucratic infrastructure, the records, the systems that make galactic government function, they're on Coruscant. Losing access to them would cripple the Republic's ability to coordinate military operations, manage its economy, and maintain legitimacy. The Separatists wouldn't just control a planet. They'd control the administrative heart of galactic civilization. The propaganda impact would be catastrophic for the Republic. For years, the Republic has been telling its citizens that victory is inevitable, that the Separatists are losing, that the war will end soon with Republic triumph. Now the Separatists are standing in the Senate chamber. They're broadcasting from the Chancellor's office. They're giving speeches about how the Republic is defeated, how worlds should surrender and join the Confederacy of Independent Systems, how the old order is dead. Some systems would believe it. Worlds that were already leaning toward the Separatists, that only stayed with the Republic out of fear or uncertainty, would openly defect. The Separatist cause would gain legitimacy it never had when it was just a rebel movement. Now it controls the capital. It has the symbolic and practical authority of Coruscant. It can claim to be the legitimate government of the galaxy. The Jedi Order faces an existential question. The Jedi Temple is on Coruscant. It's the center of their order, the repository of millennia of knowledge and artifacts, the home of the Jedi archives. If the Separatists hold Coruscant, they hold the temple. What does the Council do about that? Some Jedi would still be in the temple when it falls. Younglings, librarians, healers, Jedi who weren't on the front lines. They'd be captured or killed in the initial assault unless they evacuate quickly. The survivors would scatter, becoming refugees, spreading across the galaxy without a central home. The Jedi would become a diaspora order, no longer based on Coruscant, but distributed across Republic space. This might actually strengthen them in some ways. The Jedi had become too centralized, too dependent on their temple and their position within the Republic government. Being forced to spread out, to operate independently, to reconnect with the galaxy beyond Coruscant, could revitalize their connection to the Force and to the people they serve. It would be painful and chaotic, but it might make them more effective as peacekeepers and less like generals. But it would also make them vulnerable. The Jedi Temple contains holocrons, ancient texts, weapons, artifacts of enormous power. If the Separatists gain access to these, if Dooku or Grievous can study Jedi secrets, the advantage could shift dramatically. Dooku knows the temple's layout, knows where the most valuable items are kept. He could loot the Jedi's greatest treasures and use them against the Order. Grievous would be interested in the lightsaber collection specifically. He's obsessed with Jedi weapons, taking trophies from every Jedi he kills. The temple armory contains hundreds of lightsabers from fallen Jedi throughout history. Grievous would claim them all, would arm himself and his commanders with these weapons, would use them as symbols of the Jedi's defeat. The strategic situation of the Clone Wars would transform. The Republic military is organized around Coruscant as its command center. Fleet deployments, supply lines, communication networks, all of it runs through the capital. Losing Coruscant doesn't just lose a planet, it decapitates the military structure. Clone trooper morale would collapse in many units. They were created to defend the Republic, and the Republic's capital just fell. Some clones would fight harder, determined to retake their home. Others would question whether the war is already lost, whether they're fighting for a government that no longer effectively exists. Desertion rates would spike. Entire units might defect or simply abandon their positions. The Republic Navy would face immediate logistical problems. Coruscant's shipyards are some of the largest in the galaxy. Losing them means losing the ability to replace capital ships. The Kuat drive yards would become even more critical, but they'd be struggling to meet demand. The Republic's numerical advantage in ships would erode over time as losses can't be replaced. Separatist strategy would shift from raiding and attrition to consolidation and expansion. They don't need to win hearts and minds anymore. They've won the ultimate symbolic victory. Now they can focus on holding Coruscant, fortifying it, making it impregnable. They'd bring in massive droid armies, set up planetary shields even stronger than before, create a fortress world that would take years to crack. Dooku's position within the Separatist movement would change. Before, he was the political leader, but everyone knew the real power was with the mega-corporations funding the droid armies. Now with Coruscant taken and Palpatine captured, Dooku becomes the face of victory. The corporate backers would defer to him more, would give him real authority, would see him as the leader who delivered what they all wanted. This is when Dooku would start seriously considering betraying Sidious. He's not stupid. He knows Palpatine planned for the Separatists to lose. He knows there's a grander scheme at work. But the plan has failed, or at least gone catastrophically off script. And Dooku is a Sith. Sith don't loyally serve masters who fail. They seize power when opportunity presents itself. Dooku would start preparing his own endgame. Maybe he approaches Grievous, tells him selected truths about Palpatine's manipulations, creates an alliance based on their mutual interests in Separatist victory. Maybe he reaches out to the megacorporations, assures them that with Palpatine captured, the war can end on their terms, with them in control of vast territories and resources. Maybe he starts building a power base independent of Sidious, positioning himself to become the sole Dark Lord of the Sith. But Palpatine isn't helpless even in captivity. He's Darth Sidious, one of the most powerful Sith Lords in history. He's been manipulating galactic events for decades. Being a prisoner is inconvenient, but it's not the end. He'd immediately start working on his escape and on salvaging his plan. First, Palpatine would try to communicate with his other assets. He has agents throughout the Republic and the Separatists, beings loyal to Sidious rather than to either government. If he can get a message out, he can start coordinating a rescue or a political solution that gets him released. But this requires careful subtlety. He can't reveal his Sith identity, can't use the Force too openly, can't do anything that might expose him to Dooku or to Republic intelligence monitoring the situation. Second, Palpatine would manipulate his captors. He's a master of words, of persuasion, of finding what people want and promising it to them. He'd work on the Separatist guards, on Newt Gunray and the other Separatist council members, on anyone he has access to. He'd plant seeds of distrust, would create conflicts within the Separatist leadership, would position himself as valuable alive and dangerous dead. Third, Palpatine would consider the nuclear option, revealing himself as Sidious and taking control of the Separatists openly. It would destroy his Republic persona, would end his political career as Chancellor, but it would give him command of the Separatist military and position him to conquer the galaxy through force rather than manipulation. It's not his preferred plan, but if the alternative is failure, he'd do it. The question is whether Dooku would let him. If Palpatine tries to assert control as Sidious, Dooku could challenge him. The apprentice could try to kill the master and claim the Sith legacy for himself. They're both powerful, but in a direct confrontation, Palpatine is stronger. Dooku would need advantages, surprise, allies, circumstances that favor him. The political chaos of Coruscant's fall might provide those advantages. Anakin's journey during this crisis would be fascinating. Without the Coruscant rescue, without killing Dooku, his relationship with Palpatine develops differently. He'd still care about the Chancellor, still want to save him, but the intense bonding moment of fighting together over Coruscant doesn't happen. Palpatine can't whisper poison in his ear about the Jedi holding him back, can't manipulate him as easily from a Separatist prison cell. Meanwhile, Anakin would be working desperately on plans to rescue Palpatine and retake Coruscant. He'd volunteer for every dangerous mission, would push himself and his men to the breaking point, would take risks that alarm Obi-Wan and the Council, but it would be coming from a place of loyalty and duty rather than from the dark whispers of a Sith Lord. Anakin's aggression would be channeled into military action rather than into moral corruption. Padme's influence would be stronger in this timeline. With Palpatine captured and unable to isolate Anakin, she'd have more access to her husband. She'd be the voice urging restraint, urging political solutions, reminding him that the war is about values and people, not just military victory. Her pregnancy would make her advocacy more urgent. She wants the war over before their child is born, wants a galaxy at peace, wants Anakin to survive and be a father. The nightmares about Padme dying in childbirth would still come. The Force would still show Anakin these visions because they're part of his destiny, part of the test he'll face. But without Palpatine constantly in his ear offering dark side solutions, Anakin might handle them differently. He might confide in Obi-Wan despite the Jedi rules against attachment. He might seek help from Jedi healers. He might trust in the Force and in his loved ones rather than seeking power to control death. This creates a scenario where Anakin might not fall to the dark side at all, or at least not in the same way or at the same time. Without Palpatine's constant manipulation, without the specific circumstances that led to his fall in canon, Anakin could make different choices. He could be the hero who saves Palpatine through skill and bravery rather than through murder and betrayal. He could be the Jedi who finds balance rather than the Sith who brings destruction. But the dark side is patient and opportunistic. Even if Palpatine can't turn Anakin directly, fear for Padme could still push him toward darkness. Dooku, if he's playing his own game, might try to corrupt Anakin himself. The war's brutality, the losses, the impossible choices that generals face, all of that could erode Anakin's commitment to the light. His fall isn't inevitable without Palpatine, but it's still possible. The Republic's military response to Coruscant's occupation would be complicated by internal politics. Some senators would demand immediate reconquest regardless of cost. Others would advocate for negotiation, for peace talks that might end the war even if it means recognizing separatist control of some territory. The Republic is fracturing under the stress of losing its capital, and different factions are pulling in different directions. Bail Organa would emerge as a key leader in this crisis. He's respected, he's offering Alderaan as the temporary capital, and he's advocating for a measured response that balances military necessity with political wisdom. He'd argue that the Republic needs to stabilize before launching a massive assault on Coruscant, needs to secure its remaining territory and rebuild its strength. But he'd also oppose surrender or permanent recognition of the Separatist conquest. Mon Mothma would support Bail's position, adding her voice to the calls for strategic patience. Together, they'd form the nucleus of what might eventually become the Rebel Alliance if the Republic completely collapses. They're the senators who understand that preserving democratic values matters more than winning military victories. That losing Coruscant doesn't mean losing the war if the ideals of the Republic survive. But military leaders would be frustrated by political caution. Commanders like Admiral Yularen and various clone officers would see the delay as giving the Separatists time to fortify, as wasting the window of opportunity when Separatist forces are spread between holding Coruscant and defending their existing territory. They'd push for immediate action, for strikes while the enemy is vulnerable. The Jedi Council would be split. Yoda would sense larger patterns at work, would feel that rushing into battle serves some dark purpose they don't understand. He'd advocate for patience, for meditation, for seeking the Force's guidance. Mace Windu would want action, would argue that every day Coruscant remains in Separatist hands is a day the Republic looks weak and the war becomes harder to win. Other council members would fall on different sides of this debate. Ultimately, the Republic would probably attempt a liberation campaign within months. The political pressure would be too intense to wait longer, but it wouldn't be the overwhelming assault some want. It would be a careful, staged operation. First, establishing blockades to prevent Separatist reinforcement. Then covert operations to sabotage defenses and gather intelligence. Then, strikes against orbital platforms and surface installations. Finally, a ground invasion timed to coincide with uprisings by Republic loyalists still on the planet. Anakin would be at the forefront of this campaign. He'd lead starfighter squadrons against orbital defenses, would command clone units in the ground assault, would be everywhere the fighting is thickest. He'd be heroic and reckless, saving lives and taking risks, proving why he's considered the Republic's greatest general. But he'd also be driven by personal stakes, rescuing Palpatine and potentially Padme if she was captured. The battle for Coruscant would make the canonical space battle look like a skirmish. Thousands of ships would clash in orbit. The sky would burn with debris and explosions. Millions of beings would die in the fighting. The planet itself would be scarred by bombardment and urban warfare. It would be the largest, bloodiest battle of the Clone Wars, the moment where the conflict reaches its peak of brutality. Grievous would defend the planet with everything he has. He knows losing Coruscant means losing the war. He'd deploy every droid, every ship, every weapon in his arsenal. The defense would be fanatical and terrifying, with battle droids fighting from every building, every street, every sewer. Clone troopers would be fighting house to house, floor by floor, in combat that's more like a nightmare than a battle. Dooku's role in this battle would be crucial. If he's genuinely committed to Separatist victory, he'd be coordinating the defense, using his knowledge of Coruscant to create death traps for Republic forces. His Force abilities would make him a devastating combatant against Jedi leading the assault. He'd be the dark mirror of Anakin, the fallen Jedi fighting for the other side, and their eventual confrontation would be inevitable. But if Dooku is playing his own game, If he's betraying both Palpatine and the Separatist cause for his own purposes, his actions during the battle would be subtle sabotage. He might ensure certain defenses fail at critical moments. He might feed intelligence to Republic forces through anonymous channels. He might position himself to emerge from the chaos as the victor regardless of which side wins the battle. Palpatine, wherever he's being held, would be in maximum danger during the battle. The Separatists might execute him to prevent rescue. Republic forces might accidentally kill him in bombardment. He'd need to use the Force to protect himself, but subtly enough that witnesses don't realize what he's doing. It would be a delicate balance between survival and maintaining his secret. The battle's outcome could go multiple ways. The Republic might win through superior numbers and Jedi heroics, retaking the capital at enormous cost. The Separatists might successfully defend and force a Republic retreat, cementing their control. Or the battle might end in stalemate, with parts of Coruscant controlled by each side, turning the planet into a permanent war zone. If the Republic wins and retakes Coruscant, Palpatine would be rescued and restored to power. He'd have lost months, maybe a year or more, and his plan would be severely damaged but not destroyed. He'd need to accelerate his timeline, push harder to turn Anakin, execute Order 66 sooner than planned. The Republic would be weakened by the battle, making it easier to transform into the Empire. But Palpatine's own position would be more precarious. If the Separatists hold Coruscant, the Clone Wars enter a new phase. The Republic becomes a government in exile. The Separatists become the de facto rulers of the core, and the war becomes about whether the Republic can survive at all. Palpatine would be forced to choose between revealing himself as Sidious or watching his plans crumble. This is the scenario where he's most likely to make a desperate move. If the battle ends in stalemate, Coruscant becomes a divided planet. The upper levels might be Republic-controlled, while the lower levels are Separatist territory, or vice versa. The symbolic capital of the galaxy becomes a constant battlefield, a reminder of the war's cost. Neither side can claim victory, neither side will accept defeat, and the fighting grinds on indefinitely. In any scenario, Anakin's confrontation with Dooku would happen eventually. Whether it's during the battle for Coruscant or in some other context, the hero of the Republic and the leader of the Separatists must face each other. But without Palpatine whispering in his ear to kill an unarmed prisoner, the encounter would be different. Dooku might try to turn Anakin. He could reveal that Palpatine is Darth Sidious, could offer proof, could try to convince Anakin that he's been manipulated by a Sith Lord all along. This would be a massive gamble because Anakin's loyalty to Palpatine is strong, but it might work if presented with evidence. Anakin might not believe it immediately, but the seeds of doubt would be planted. Alternatively, Dooku might simply fight to kill. If he's broken from Sidious and is pursuing his own path to power, Anakin is just another obstacle to eliminate. The duel would be brutal and genuine, two powerful Force users fighting without restraint. Dooku is more skilled and experienced, but Anakin is younger, stronger, and fueled by passion. The fight could go either way. If Anakin kills Dooku in fair combat rather than executing him as in canon, it changes his psychology. He'd have defeated a major enemy, but not through murder. He'd have won through skill and determination, not through giving in to darkness. This would be a heroic moment rather than a step toward the dark side, another divergence that makes Anakin's fall less likely. But if Dooku escapes, or if the revelation about Palpatine happens before the duel, everything shifts. Anakin would be caught between loyalty to his mentor and the horrifying possibility that he's been serving a Sith Lord. He'd need to investigate, to find the truth, to reconcile what he thought he. The revelation of Palpatine as Sidious would change the entire galaxy if it becomes public. The Jedi would realize the Sith have been in control of the Republic all along. The Senate would understand that the war was orchestrated from the beginning. The clone troopers would learn that their ultimate commander is the enemy. The whole structure of the Clone Wars would collapse as the conspiracy is exposed. Palpatine would have limited options if exposed. He could try to seize power through force, using his Sith abilities to kill anyone who opposes him. He could attempt to spin the revelation, to claim he infiltrated the Sith to destroy them from within. He could flee and attempt to rebuild his power base in secret. None of these options are good. All of them represent the failure of his grand plan. The most likely response would be a violent power grab, Palpatine would declare himself Emperor through sheer force, would use whatever assets he's cultivated to seize control of the military, would crush opposition before it can organize. But without years of political preparation, without the gradual erosion of rights and freedoms that characterized his canonical rise, this approach would be much harder. He'd face immediate rebellion from multiple sectors, might have to fight a civil war to establish his empire. Order 66 becomes complicated in this scenario. The inhibitor chips in the clones are still there, still ready to execute the Jedi. But if Palpatine is exposed as Sidious before he can give the order, or if he's still captured by Separatists when he tries to give it, the timing could be off. Some clones might receive the order, others might not. The Jedi genocide might be partial rather than total, leaving more survivors but also creating chaos, as some Jedi are killed while others escape. A partial Jedi purge would be devastating but not extinction level. Hundreds might die, but hundreds might also survive. These survivors would scatter across the galaxy, some going into hiding, others forming resistance cells against whatever regime emerges from the chaos. The Jedi Order wouldn't be destroyed completely, though it would be shattered and have to rebuild from fragments. Yoda and Obi-Wan's roles would change if the Jedi aren't completely destroyed. Instead of going into exile to protect the Skywalker children, they might lead the surviving Jedi in a guerrilla campaign against the Empire or the Separatists or whoever ends up in control. They'd be generals of a different kind of war, fighting to preserve the Jedi tradition and to restore some form of legitimate government. Anakin's choice in this scenario becomes even more critical. If Palpatine is exposed before Order 66, if Anakin learns the truth before he's fully corrupted, he has to choose between his loyalty to Palpatine and his loyalty to the Jedi. This is the fundamental choice of his character. But the circumstances make all the difference in which way he goes. If Padme is safe, if Anakin hasn't had the nightmares or has found other ways to deal with them, if Obi-Wan and the Council have been supportive rather than judgmental, Anakin might choose the light. He might arrest Palpatine or fight him, or simply walk away from both the Jedi and the Sith. He could be the hero who exposes the conspiracy, who saves the Republic, who prevents the Empire from rising. But if Padme is in danger, if the nightmares are tormenting him, if he believes only Palpatine can teach him to save her, Anakin might still fall. He might side with Sidious against the Jedi, might help him seize power, might become Darth Vader despite everything. The dark side is seductive, and fear for loved ones is a powerful motivator. Anakin's fall is always possible, as long as he has something to lose and someone offering to help him keep it. The galaxy that emerges from this alternate Clone Wars would be fundamentally different. If the Separatists hold Coruscant long-term, the Republic might never recover. It could fracture into multiple smaller governments, could collapse entirely, could be absorbed into a Separatist-dominated galactic state. The Jedi would be scattered and weakened. Palpatine's empire might never rise, or might rise in a different form with different characteristics. If the Republic retakes Coruscant, but at enormous cost, the transition to empire might be even easier than in canon. The Republic would be so damaged, so desperate for stability, that people would accept authoritarian rule just to make the chaos end. Palpatine could position himself as the only leader strong enough to rebuild, could justify emergency powers that never expire, could create his empire from the ashes of the Republic's Pyrrhic victory. If the war ends in stalemate with neither side clearly winning, the galaxy might enter a period of permanent conflict, multiple governments claiming legitimacy, constant low-level warfare, systems choosing sides based on self-interest rather than ideology. This fractured galaxy would be more like the Outer Rim territories, where law is suggestion and power determines everything. The fate of specific characters would vary wildly based on these outcomes. Anakin might be a Jedi hero who never fell, a Sith Lord who serves a different master than in canon, a fallen Jedi who died in battle before becoming Vader, or even a Force user who rejected both Jedi and Sith and found his own path. Padme might survive and lead the restored Republic, might die in the chaos, might become a leader of resistance against whatever tyranny emerges. Obi-Wan could be a general of the surviving Jedi, a hunted fugitive, a mentor to a new generation of Force users, or dead in Order 66 if it happens differently. Yoda might guide the Jedi's rebuilding, might still go into exile but for different reasons, might die fighting Sidious if the confrontation happens under different circumstances. Every character's fate branches into multiple possibilities based on the choices they make and the situation they face. The sequel trilogy era would be completely different. If the Empire never rises, there's no need for Luke and Leia to be the next generation's heroes. They might not even exist if Anakin and Padme's relationship develops differently. If the Empire does rise but differently, the rebellion would have different origins, different leaders, different goals. The entire structure of Star Wars as we know it would be transformed. But let's dig deeper into the specific scenarios that could emerge from the Separatist conquest of Coruscant. Each possibility creates its own branching timeline with profound implications for every character and faction involved. First, consider the scenario where the Republic successfully liberates Coruscant after months of brutal fighting. The cost would be staggering. Millions of clone troopers dead, hundreds of Jedi killed in urban combat, vast sections of the planet destroyed by bombardment and ground fighting. The cultural treasures of thousands of years reduced to rubble. The Senate building might be in ruins. The Jedi Temple could be badly damaged. Even in victory, the Republic would be gutted. Palpatine, once rescued, would face questions he never had to answer in the canonical timeline. Why did the defenses fail? How did the Separatists penetrate so deeply into the core? Who is responsible for this catastrophe? As Chancellor, he'd be the obvious target for blame. Senators who lost constituents, military leaders who lost battles, citizens who lost homes, all of them would demand accountability. Palpatine would need to deflect this blame carefully. His strategy would likely involve scapegoating the Jedi. He'd suggest that if the Jedi had been more effective military commanders, if they'd focused on defense instead of aggressive campaigns in the Outer Rim, Coruscant would never have fallen. This narrative would resonate with beings looking for someone to blame. The Jedi are already unpopular in some quarters for their role in the war. Pinning Coruscant's fall on them could turn public opinion decisively against the Order. Mace Windu would recognize this manipulation but struggle to counter it. The Jedi did lead the military during the period when Coruscant fell. They were responsible for strategic decisions that left the capital vulnerable. Even if those decisions were sound at the time, even if no one could have predicted the Separatist assault, the optics are terrible. The Jedi failed to protect Coruscant. That's the simple, devastating truth that Palpatine would exploit ruthlessly. The political maneuvering in the aftermath would be intense. Palpatine would push for even greater emergency powers, arguing that the fall of Coruscant proves the Republic needs stronger centralized leadership. He'd propose military reforms that put more power in the Chancellor's hands. He'd suggest oversight committees for the Jedi to prevent future strategic failures. Every proposal would be framed as necessary for security, for preventing another catastrophe, for winning the war. Some senators would resist. Bail Organa and Mon Mothma would see where this is heading, would recognize that Palpatine is using the crisis to accumulate dictatorial power. They'd try to build a coalition to oppose him, to preserve democratic institutions even in wartime. But they'd be fighting an uphill battle. Most senators would be terrified, desperate for someone to take charge and make them feel safe. Palpatine's authoritarian proposals would pass with overwhelming support. This accelerated consolidation of power could actually help Palpatine despite the disruption to his plans. In the canonical timeline, he spent years gradually eroding democracy, slowly accumulating authority. But the shock of Coruscant's fall and liberation could let him seize power much faster. Beings would accept in months what they might have resisted over years, because the trauma makes them willing to trade freedom for security. Order 66 could be executed in the chaos of Coruscant's liberation. As Republic forces fight through the streets, as communication networks are disrupted and chain of command is unclear, Palpatine could activate the inhibitor chips. The Jedi leading the assault would suddenly be attacked by their own clone troopers. In the confusion of urban warfare, it might take time for surviving Jedi to realize what's happening galaxy-wide. More Jedi might die because they're caught in active combat when the betrayal happens. But some Jedi would survive precisely because of the chaos. Communications being down means some clone units never receive the order. Some Jedi might be separated from their troops when it happens. The destruction and disorder of a city-sized battlefield provides more hiding places, more opportunities to escape than the relatively controlled situations where Jedi died in the canonical timeline. The Purge might kill 60 or 70% of the Jedi instead of 90+%. These survivors would have to decide what to do. Some would try to regroup, to form a resistance against what they'd now recognize as a Sith plot. Others would go into hiding, would disappear into the galactic underworld, or flee to the unknown regions. A few might try to rescue younglings from the temple or other Jedi facilities before the Empire consolidates control. The surviving Jedi would be scattered, traumatized, and hunted, but they'd exist as a thorn in the Empire's side. Anakin's role in Order 66 is critical. In canon, he leads the attack on the Jedi Temple, killing younglings and masters alike. It's the point of no return, the act that fully transforms him into Darth Vader. But in this timeline, circumstances might be different. If Anakin is fighting to liberate Coruscant when the order comes through, if he's separated from Palpatine's direct influence, if he sees clone troopers turn on Jedi he respects, his reaction could be very different. Imagine Anakin witnessing clones gun down Aayla Secura or Ki-Adi-Mundi or another Jedi he's fought beside. The horror and betrayal would be overwhelming. He might think it's a Separatist trick, some kind of mind control. He might try to stop it, to protect the Jedi, to figure out what's happening. And if he's not immediately with Palpatine, if he doesn't receive the personal manipulation that turned him in canon, he might not participate in the Temple massacre. Without Anakin leading the Temple attack, the slaughter might be less complete. Some Jedi Masters inside might organize a defense, might evacuate younglings, might hold off clone troopers long enough for survivors to escape. The Temple wouldn't fall as quickly or as totally. This changes the calculus of the Jedi's survival. Instead of near extinction, they face decimation but not destruction. Palpatine's biggest concern in this scenario would be Anakin. If Anakin doesn't fall during Order 66, if he sides with the Jedi against the clones, if he starts asking dangerous questions about who gave the order and why, Palpatine's plan for creating Darth Vader falls apart. He'd need to either corrupt Anakin quickly or eliminate him as a threat. Neither option is ideal. The approach Palpatine would likely take is to isolate Anakin and work on him intensively. He'd call Anakin to his office, would reveal himself as Darth Sidious, would offer the same temptations he offered in canon. The power to save Padme, the freedom from Jedi restrictions, the chance to bring order to the galaxy, but without the context of Anakin having already murdered Jedi, without the sunk cost fallacy of having committed to darkness, these temptations might not work as well. Anakin's choice in this moment determines his fate and the galaxy's. If he rejects Palpatine, if he tries to arrest or kill Sidious, if he sides with the Jedi, he becomes the hero who exposes the Sith and prevents the Empire's rise. The cost would be that he can't save Padme if she's destined to die in childbirth. He'd have to accept loss, accept that some things can't be controlled, accept the Jedi teaching of letting go. That's incredibly hard for Anakin. but it's possible. If he accepts Palpatine's offer, he falls to the dark side, but under different circumstances than in canon. He wouldn't have murdered younglings yet, wouldn't have the same guilt and self-loathing driving him deeper into darkness. His fall would be more calculated, more about choosing power over principle, rather than about being trapped by his own atrocities. This version of Vader might be more conflicted, more redeemable, more haunted by the choice he made. There's also a middle path Anakin might take. He could reject both the Jedi and Palpatine. He could decide that both sides have failed, that both are corrupt or limited in different ways. He could take Padme and disappear, abandoning the war and the Force politics to focus on protecting his family. This would remove him from the board as either hero or villain, creating a power vacuum that others would fill. The battle for Coruscant would also determine Dooku's fate in ways very different from canon. If the Republic is assaulting the planet, Dooku would be coordinating the defense. He'd be using his knowledge of Coruscant's layout, his political connections, his Force abilities to make the liberation as costly as possible. But he'd also be making calculations about his own survival and ambitions. Dooku knows that if the Republic wins, he's finished unless he has an escape plan. He's the political leader of the Separatists, a visible target for Republic justice. He'd be tried for treason and war crimes, likely executed. So as the battle turns against the Separatists, as Republic forces push deeper into the city, Dooku would need to decide whether to fight to the death or to seek some other outcome. One option is to approach the Jedi with an offer, information about Palpatine in exchange for clemency. Dooku could reveal that Chancellor Palpatine is actually Darth Sidious, could provide proof of the Sith's manipulation of both sides. This would be a betrayal of his master, but it would also be Dooku's only chance to avoid execution. The question is whether the Jedi would believe him and whether they could act on the information before Palpatine consolidates power. Mace. Windu's reaction to Dooku's revelation would be skeptical but intrigued. The pieces would fit too well. Palpatine's mysterious rise to power, his accumulation of authority, his survival of multiple assassination attempts that seemed almost staged. If Dooku can provide concrete evidence, holocrons or recordings or witnesses, the Jedi might be forced to confront the horrifying truth that they've been serving a Sith Lord. The confrontation between the Jedi and Palpatine would happen differently if Dooku reveals the truth before Order 66. Mace might lead a team to arrest the Chancellor before Palpatine can activate the inhibitor chips. The fight in Palpatine's office could happen with Anakin present but not yet fallen, creating a very different dynamic. Anakin would have to choose between defending Palpatine or helping the Jedi arrest him, without the context of Palpatine offering to save Padme. If Palpatine is arrested before Order 66, the entire endgame changes. The inhibitor chips might never activate, or might activate chaotically without proper coordination. The Jedi would survive in much larger numbers. The Republic wouldn't transition smoothly into the Empire. Palpatine might be imprisoned or killed before he can seize absolute power. This is the scenario where his grand plan most completely fails. But Palpatine doesn't become a Sith Lord and survive for decades by being unprepared for contingencies. He'd have backup plans, assets in place for exactly this kind of emergency. If arrested, he might have loyalists within the military or government who'd attempt to free him. He might have blackmail material on key senators that he'd threaten to release. He might even use the Force to escape, revealing his powers but gaining freedom to fight another day. The revelation of Palpatine as Sidious would send shockwaves through the galaxy regardless of whether he's successfully arrested. Citizens who trusted the Chancellor would feel betrayed. Senators who supported his policies would face political ruin for their association with the Sith Lord. The entire Republic government would be delegitimized by the revelation that its leader was the enemy all along. This creates a crisis of legitimacy that could fracture the Republic even without the Empire rising. In this chaos, multiple factions would compete for power. The Jedi might try to restore order and democratic government, but they'd be tainted by their failure to detect Sidious and by their role in the war. The Senate might attempt to elect new leadership and continue the Republic, but trust in government would be shattered. Military leaders might seize control, arguing that only strong leadership can prevent collapse. The galaxy might fragment into multiple governments, none with clear legitimacy. The Separatists would face their own crisis if Palpatine is exposed. The megacorporations funding the war would realize they've been manipulated by both sides, that the conflict was never about their interests but about Sith machinations. Some might try to negotiate peace and rejoin the Republic. Others might continue fighting, seeing opportunity in the Republic's chaos to expand their power. The Separatist movement would likely splinter without clear leadership. Grievous's reaction to learning that Dooku and Palpatine were playing both sides would be rage. He's a warrior who believes in the Separatist cause, who sees himself as fighting for independence from corrupt Republic rule. Learning that his leaders were Republic agents, that the entire war was a fraud, would shatter his worldview. He might turn on Dooku, might go rogue with whatever forces. A rogue Grievous leading a faction of true believers would be dangerous in the post-war chaos. He'd have battle droids, ships, and the tactical brilliance that made him feared throughout the war. He'd also have nothing to lose and a burning desire for revenge against both the Republic and the Sith. His campaign would be nihilistic and brutal, attacking anyone he sees as part of the conspiracy that used him. Now let's explore the scenario where the Separatists successfully hold Coruscant long-term. The Republic's liberation attempts fail. The core is divided between Separatist-controlled systems near Coruscant and Republic-loyal systems further out. The war enters a new phase of grinding stalemate where neither side can deliver a knockout blow. In this scenario, Palpatine faces a long-term problem. He's imprisoned on Coruscant with no immediate prospect of rescue. The Republic can't reach him. His Sith identity might be discovered eventually if he's held for months or years. His plan to become Emperor is on indefinite hold. He needs to adapt to circumstances he never anticipated. Palpatine's adaptation would likely involve taking control of the Separatist movement from within. He'd start by working on his guards and interrogators, using forced persuasion subtly to plant suggestions and create loyalists. He'd manipulate Separatist council members who visit him, would play on their fears and ambitions. He'd position himself as someone who could be useful to them alive, who could provide intelligence or political leverage. Over time, Palpatine might engineer a situation where he's released or escapes with Separatist assistance. He might convince them that he's disillusioned with the Republic, that he wants to join the Separatist cause. He could offer to use his knowledge of Republic strategy and politics to help them win the war. The Separatists, desperate for any advantage, might accept this offer despite knowing it's likely a trap. Once free, Palpatine would work to take control of the Separatist government. He'd eliminate rivals, would position loyalists in key positions, would gradually transform the Confederacy of Independent Systems into an autocratic regime with himself at the head. It would be a slower, more difficult path than his canonical route to power, but Palpatine is patient and resourceful. He could still create an empire, just a different one. This Separatist empire would have a different character than the Galactic Empire of canon. It would be based in the core, but would include the Outer Rim territories that supported the Separatists. It would be more corporate-dominated, with the megacorporations having real power rather than being subordinate to the Emperor. It would be more decentralized, with local governors and corporate boards wielding authority that canonical imperial governors lacked. Palpatine would chafe against these limitations but would work within them while consolidating power. He'd use Sith alchemy and dark-side manipulation to extend his influence. He'd create a secret police and intelligence network to control information and eliminate threats. He'd slowly transform the corporate councils into rubber stamps that approve his decisions. Over years or decades, he'd centralize power just as he did in canon, but starting from a different position. The Republic remnant would be led by whoever the Senate chooses as emergency chancellor in Palpatine's absence. Bail Organa is a strong possibility. He's respected, he's proven capable in crisis, and he represents the democratic values the Republic claims to fight for. Chancellor Organa would face the monumental task of leading a government in exile, maintaining military resistance against separatist occupation of the core, and keeping hope alive for eventual liberation. Under Bail's leadership, the Republic might actually become more genuinely democratic. Without Palpatine's manipulations, without the constant emergency powers and erosion of rights, the wartime Republic could reform itself. Bail would resist the temptation toward authoritarianism, would insist on maintaining civil liberties even in crisis, would work to heal the divisions that led to war. This would make the Republic weaker militarily, but stronger morally. The Jedi would have more freedom to operate as peacekeepers rather than generals in this scenario. Without Palpatine controlling them through the Chancellor's office, without being forced into military leadership roles, they could return to their traditional mission. They might advise the Republic government but not lead its armies. They might focus on diplomatic solutions and humanitarian missions rather than combat operations. This return to traditional Jedi roles could strengthen the Order. Many Jedi were uncomfortable with their position as military commanders. It violated their principles, compromised their connection to the Force, made them complicit in the war's violence. Being released from this burden would allow them to reconnect with what it means to be a Jedi, to serve the Force rather than serve political interests. But it would also make them vulnerable if Order 66 is eventually activated. Palpatine still has the inhibitor chips as a weapon even if he's leading the Separatists instead of the Republic. He could potentially activate them remotely, could order clone troopers to turn on their Jedi, even if those Jedi are no longer the clones' commanders. The logistics would be more difficult, but it's still possible. The clone troopers themselves would face an identity crisis as the war drags on. They were created to serve the Republic, but the Republic has lost its capital and much of its territory. They're fighting for a government in exile, for a Republic that exists more as an idea than as a functioning state. Some clones would remain loyal, would fight for the values the Republic represents. Others would question what they're fighting for, would wonder if the war is already lost. Desertion rates among clones would climb in this extended war scenario. Without Palpatine's control, and without clear victory in sight, some clones would decide to pursue their own lives rather than die for a losing cause. They might form clone communities on neutral worlds, might become mercenaries, might even join the Separatists if they're disillusioned enough. The clone army, designed to be perfectly loyal, would fragment under the stress of endless war. Anakin's development in this long war scenario would be fascinating. Without Palpatine's constant manipulation, without the pressure to become something he's not, Anakin might mature into a genuinely wise and balanced Jedi. Years of combat would give him perspective. Marriage to Padme, if it continues, would give him emotional stability. The birth of Luke and Leia would give him purpose beyond the war. This version of Anakin might become the Jedi the Order always hoped he'd be. He'd combine his raw power with hard-won wisdom. He'd learn to let go of fear and attachment while still caring deeply about people. He'd find balance between passion and peace. He'd be the chosen one fulfilling his destiny by becoming a Force user who transcends the limitations of both Jedi and Sith traditions. But years of war could also grind Anakin down. The constant fighting, the losses, the seemingly futile struggle against an enemy that holds the capital, all of it could push him toward darkness in different ways than canon. He might become cynical and ruthless, might decide that winning justifies any means, might embrace aggression and domination as tools of war. This wouldn't be Palpatine's corruption, but the war's corruption. The slow erosion of principles that happens to soldiers in endless conflicts. Padmé's role would be critical in determining which version of Anakin emerges. If she's with him, if she's providing moral guidance and emotional support, if she's reminding him what they're fighting for, Anakin might stay in the light. But if they're separated by the war, if Padmé dies in childbirth or is killed by Separatists, if Anakin loses his anchor, he could fall into darkness without Palpatine's involvement. The children, Luke and Leia, would grow up in a very different galaxy if born during this extended war. They wouldn't be hidden on Tatooine and Alderaan. They'd probably be with their parents or in secure Republic facilities. They'd grow up knowing they're Anakin Skywalker's children, knowing their father is a Jedi hero. They'd be raised in wartime, aware of the conflict, possibly training in the Force from a young age. This early training could make them incredibly powerful by their teenage years. Instead of Luke discovering his abilities at 19 and Leia never really training, both twins could be skilled Force users by adolescence. They could be contributing to the war effort, could be symbols of hope for the Republic, could be the next generation of Jedi rising even as the war continues. The war itself would evolve into something unrecognizable from the Clone Wars we know. After years of stalemate, after millions of deaths, after entire economies mobilized for endless conflict, both sides would be exhausted and desperate. New weapons would be developed, new tactics would emerge. The fighting would become more brutal and nihilistic as hope for peace fades. Superweapons might be deployed by both sides. The Republic might develop something like the Death Star out of desperation to break the stalemate. The Separatists might create their own planet killers or doomsday devices. The ethical restraints that limited the war initially would erode. Both sides would be willing to do terrible things if it meant winning or at least not losing. This escalation could lead to galactic-scale devastation. Whole worlds might be rendered uninhabitable. Species might be driven to extinction. The economic and social structures that maintained civilization would collapse in many sectors. The Clone Wars would become. Eventually, this endless war would have to end somehow, perhaps through mutual exhaustion, both sides agreeing to peace, because continuing to fight means mutual destruction. Perhaps through a third faction emerging, possibly from the Outer Rim or unknown regions, that forces the Republic and Separatists to unite against a common threat. Perhaps through generational change, with younger leaders on both sides deciding to end a war they didn't start. The peace settlement would reshape the galaxy. Coruscant might remain Separatist territory, becoming the capital of a new confederation. The Republic might reform with a different capital and a more federal structure. The galaxy could be divided into multiple spheres of influence, with different governments controlling different regions. None of these outcomes resemble the Galactic Empire, which means Palpatine's vision has definitively failed. In a divided galaxy scenario, the Jedi Order would face interesting choices. Do they align with the Republic government, maintaining their traditional role? Do they declare neutrality and serve as mediators between factions? Do they dissolve as an institution and allow Jedi to serve where their conscience directs? The Order's future would depend on learning from the mistakes that led to the Clone Wars. A reformed Jedi Order might be more decentralized, with multiple temples and councils rather than the hierarchical structure based on Coruscant. It might be more open to diversity in Force philosophy, allowing Jedi to interpret the Force in different ways rather than enforcing a single orthodoxy. It might permit attachments in families, recognizing that the old prohibitions created vulnerabilities that Sith exploited. Anakin and Padmé's family could be foundational to this new Jedi vision. They'd prove that Jedi can have relationships and children without falling to the dark side. Luke and Leia would represent a new generation of Force users raised with love and attachment, who nonetheless choose to serve others. The Skywalker family could redeem the concept of Jedi having personal lives. The ultimate question in all these scenarios is whether the dark side wins even if Palpatine's specific plan fails. The Sith might not get their empire, but if the galaxy descends into chaos and endless war, If hope and civilization collapse, if fear and hatred dominate, hasn't the dark side achieved its goal? Victory for darkness doesn't necessarily mean Sith rule. It could mean the triumph of negative emotions and destructive impulses galaxy-wide. This is where the Force itself might intervene. The Force seeks balance. If the dark side is winning through chaos rather than through Sidious's order, the Force might empower champions of the light to restore equilibrium. This could mean Anakin if he stays true to the light. Could mean Luke and Leia emerging as heroes earlier than in canon. Could mean other Force users arising to counterbalance the darkness. The will of the Force is a mysterious thing in Star Wars. It's not deterministic, doesn't force specific outcomes, but it does create opportunities and guide those who listen to it. In a timeline where Palpatine's plan fails, the Force might guide events toward a different but still balanced outcome. The Chosen One might bring balance not by destroying the Sith after they rise, but by preventing them from rising in the first place. What if the Separatists took Coruscant? The answer depends on what happens next, on choices made by Palpatine and Dooku and Anakin and Padme and countless others. But in every scenario, it represents a massive disruption to Palpatine's plan, a moment where control slips and chaos enters the carefully orchestrated game. It shows that even Sith Lords can't control everything, that war contains elements beyond any master's manipulation, that the best laid plans can fall apart when they collide with reality. And perhaps that's the most important lesson. Palpatine's plan was brilliant but fragile. It required so many things to go exactly right, required both sides to follow their scripts, required the galaxy to react in predictable ways. The Separatists taking Coruscant would be the moment where the script is thrown out, where improvisation is required, where Palpatine discovers that being the puppet master doesn't mean the puppets can't surprise you. In the end, the Separatists taking Coruscant is about the limits of control and the power of chaos. It's about how one unexpected victory can cascade into complete timeline transformation. It's about testing whether Palpatine is truly the genius he believes himself to be, or whether he's just been lucky that his manipulations haven't encountered genuine resistance. And it's about showing that in Star Wars, where the Force has a will and heroes make choices, no plan is guaranteed to succeed no matter how carefully constructed. The galaxy that might have been, where Separatist flags fly over the Senate building and Palpatine sits in a detention cell instead of on a throne, is radically different from the one we know, but it's no less Star Wars for being different. It's still about the eternal struggle between light and dark, still about individuals choosing their destinies, still about hope persisting even when everything seems lost. Just with different heroes, different villains, and different paths to the same fundamental truths about courage, compassion, and the power of choice.